He stands in stone and shadow, a relief carved more than 3 millennia ago. At the top of a 7-foot basalt stele, a king reaches toward a bearded figure, an image our ancestors read as authority. That stone survives in the Louvre. Its surface begins with a promise, laws written in cuneiform, a ruler speaking on behalf of order. What does a law look like when you first try to carve it into history, and why did one man decide to do it in a public, permanent way? Hammurabi was not born to empire. He came to power around 1792 BCE as a ruler of a city-state called Babylon, one of many along the Euphrates. He was an Amorite who inherited a fragile patchwork of towns and canals. His method was steady: military campaigns, alliances, and skillful diplomacy. Over 3 decades, he turned Babylon from a regional player into an axis of power. Not overnight, but by engineering loyalties and a single center of rule. Unifying Mesopotamia meant more than winning battles. Hammurabi took control of trade routes, standardized weights and measures, and put royal authority over local judges and temples. The result was a larger marketplace and a steadier tax base. Markets hummed along the Euphrates, grain, textiles, and raw materials flowed. With economic centralization came a new problem: disputes. When neighbors from different towns argued, who set the rules? Enter the stele, a public record carved into stone. Excavated in 1901 at the Elamite site of Susa and now displayed in Paris, the monument contains a prologue, nearly 300 laws, and an epilogue. It's not just a legal manual, it's a political artifact. The top relief frames the text: Hammurabi stands before the sun god Shamash, the divine guarantor of justice. The laws below are organized, numbered, and meant to be read by many eyes. Why codify law at all? The stele itself gives one reason: to establish order and legitimacy. A written code makes the king visible as the provider of justice. It standardizes outcomes that used to depend on local custom or the whim of a judge. For Hammurabi, carving laws into stone was a way to centralize power while promising predictable relief to ordinary people, at least in principle. The code's structure is methodical. It's full of conditional statements. If this happens, then that follows. The laws cover family life, property, commerce, labor relations, professional responsibilities, and criminal acts. They are casuistic, case-driven, rather than abstract principles that makes them practical, designed for arbitration in courts and for the record-keeping culture of scribes. Concrete examples make the code feel immediate. There are rules about builders whose constructions collapse, regulations for physicians and their fees, ratings for trade fraud, and fines for theft. The laws assign liability and compensation in everyday scenarios. Reading them is like stepping into a courtroom where livelihoods, bodies, and reputations are negotiated in units of silver and land. One idea people point to first is lex talionis, the eye for an eye notion. The code contains reciprocity, but it's not a single equalizer. Punishments and compensations vary by social class. Freemen, commoners, and slaves could receive different penalties for the same act. The law enforces equality before the state, but it also preserves social hierarchies that were part of everyday life. How were these laws enforced? Local judges and assemblies still handled disputes, but the code provided a reference. Royal inspectors reviewed cases. Scribes recorded hearings. The judiciary was not a single royal bureaucratic machine, but the code created expectations, standards a judge could cite to justify a verdict. That stability matters when you run canals, collect taxes, and organize conscripted labor. From the perspective of ordinary people, the code shaped marriage contracts, inheritance, land disputes, and commercial life. Women had rights within marriage, and property could pass through families, though their legal standing depended on class and status. The code institutionalized responsibilities for household heads and provided legal mechanisms for settling everyday conflict. All of this depends on scribes. In Babylon, training to write cuneiform was a gateway to power. Scribal schools taught grammar, accounting, and law. Graduates populated temples, palaces, and courts. Their tablets survive: administrative lists, school exercises, and mathematical problems. A literate class made law more than sermon or custom. It made it recordable, repeatable, teachable. Babylonian mathematics looks different from ours, but it's sophisticated. They used a sexagesimal or base 60 system for fractions and calculations, a numerical language that fit astronomy and geometry. Surviving tablets show field measurements, complex calculations, and abstract number lists. One famous tablet, known today as Plimpton 322, hints at deep numerical understanding long before Greek geometry came on the scene. Astronomy grew from practical needs, planting seasons, river levels, and festivals, into a systematic science. Babylonian astronomers kept long sequences of observations, moon phases, planetary positions, and eclipses. Over centuries, they developed predictive schemes that later astronomers, including Greeks, would inherit. Sky watching was both pragmatic and religious, predicting omens and regulating the calendar. If mathematics and astronomy were the intellect of Babylon, architecture was its face. The city was famous for its massive walls, described by later writers as wide enough for chariots, and for monumental gates decorated with glazed bricks. The Ishtar Gate and the processional way created a visual narrative of power and ritual. Building in fired brick and vivid color announced a city's wealth and identity to travelers and subjects alike. At the center of Babylon stood religious platforms and ziggurats, stepped temples that rose like miniature mountains. Itamananki, the Great Temple Tower, inspired later storytellers and may be the origin of the Tower of Babel story in the Hebrew Bible. These structures were civic centers as much as religious ones. They anchored rituals, calendrical observances, and the city's sense of place. Then there are the Hanging Gardens, the image that refuses to die. Ancient Greek writers described terraces of green suspended over brick, a royal garden irrigated from the Euphrates. The image is cinematic: vines, fountains, exotic trees. Nebuchadnezzar II is often named as the patron, but the gardens are unlike the rest of Babylon's secure archaeological record. Descriptions are late and sources are second-hand. Archaeology complicates the myth. No definitive garden terraces have been excavated in Babylon, matching ancient descriptions. Some scholars propose the gardens were in Nineveh, built by the Assyrian king Sennacherib, and later confused with Babylon. Others suggest the gardens existed but left little trace because of perishable wooden infrastructure. The truth is unsettled. The gardens live somewhere between memory, propaganda, and archaeologists' trowels. Centuries after Hammurabi, Babylon rose again under a revived dynasty. Nebuchadnezzar II, ruling in the late 7th and early 6th centuries BCE, rebuilt palaces, canals, and city walls on a grand scale. His reign turned Babylon into a Neo-Babylonian cultural center, a place where old Mesopotamian traditions were refashioned into imperial spectacle. Nebuchadnezzar's construction projects were political theater. Monumental gates, glazed brick reliefs, and palace complexes told a story of return, the city remade as a stage for royal power. The scale of labor required food, organization, and tribute. Monument building served a double purpose: to glorify the king and to bind the population into a shared identity centered on Babylon. Babylon's reach touched neighboring peoples. Nebuchadnezzar's campaigns included the Levant. His armies besieged and captured Jerusalem, and a portion of the Judean elite were deported to Babylon. The deportation had political logic, removing elites who could lead rebellions, and cultural consequences. Exiles took Babylonian legal, religious, and administrative practices back into the region in complicated ways. The Neo-Babylonian economy underwrote empire. Agriculture fed urban populations, canals supported irrigation, and long-distance trade brought silver, timber, and luxury items into the city. Temple estates and royal workshops coordinated resources. Monumental projects were not just symbolic. They were economic engines that required raw materials and human labor pulled from across the empire. Religion shaped policy. Marduk, Babylon's patron god, rose in prominence and served as political glue. Priests managed temple lands, timed festival rituals, and interpreted omens. Sacred calendars regulated planting and state ceremonies. In practice, religion supported the state, and the state, through building and ritual, reinforced religious authority. Babylon was never isolated. Assyrian scribes, Persian administrators, and Greek historians all encountered Babylonian texts. Mathematical tables and planetary observations traveled. The techniques for recording numbers and celestial events influenced Hellenistic scholars. Knowledge moved along trade and conquest routes in clay and ink, not in trophies, and that slow transmission reshaped later science. The end of Babylon's political independence came in 539 BCE, when Cyrus the Great of Persia took the city. Sources vary. Some suggest a conquest with little bloodshed, others describe turmoil. Babylonian chronicles and the Cyrus cylinder create different emphases. The cylinder presents Cyrus as a restorer who respected local cults. The capture altered power in the Near East, but the city remained a jewel in an imperial crown. Persian administration often preserved the institutions they inherited. Babylonian scribes continued to write, temples continued to function, and the irrigation economy carried on. Political power shifted to Persepolis and other centers, but Babylon's bureaucratic and intellectual structures had a new sponsor. That continuity meant Babylonian law and scholarship circulated under Persian rule, not extinguished by it. Hammurabi's code left a legal idea that law could be written, public, and used as a standard for adjudication. Later legal traditions, including parts of the Hebrew Bible and Roman practices of codification centuries later, reflect the move toward written law. Not direct copies, but shared concepts, specified penalties, state-backed enforcement, and laws addressed to a broader reading public. The scientific legacy is tangible in surprising ways. Babylonian base 60 counting is still with us, 60 seconds, 60 minutes. Their astronomical records fed later epicyclic models. Mathematical procedures, solving quadratic problems, working with reciprocals, became part of the toolkit that ancient Greek and Islamic scholars later expanded. A scribal tradition of calculation became a cultural inheritance. Babylon's image in memory is paradoxical. To some, it became a symbol of decadence and hubris. To others, a wonder of civilization. Biblical prophets used Babylon as a rhetorical device. Classical writers marveled at its walls. Those stories shaped later receptions of the city more than archaeological reality did. Myth and memory often outpace the evidence. Modern archaeology complicates old narratives. Excavations reveal layers of rebuilding, sites looted or repurposed, and archives scattered across museums worldwide. Debates over the Hanging Gardens or the exact reach of Hammurabi's law are active. Each new tablet can nudge interpretations. Absence of evidence is not always evidence of absence, and careful contextual work matters. There is an ethical layer to this archaeology. Objects like the Hammurabi stele ended up in foreign museums after wars and excavations. Scholars now ask who owns the past and who gets to tell the story. Repatriation debates, collaborative research, and local stewardship shape how Babylon's heritage is presented today. Culture is not just ancient, it's contested in the present. So what remains of Hammurabi's achievement? A carved stone, fragmented but legible, a set of legal expectations, and the cultural machinery of law and learning that help build cities, economies, and sciences. The code is neither a blueprint for modern justice nor a curiosity locked in a museum. It's a political act, a state making rules visible and binding across a diverse population. And the unanswered questions remain vivid. Did gardens really hang over Babylon? How much of Hammurabi's code survived in practice versus theory? Which tablets still lie unexcavated, waiting to revise our narratives? The more we dig, the more complicated the story becomes, which is to say it becomes more human, messy, and consequential. The final consequence is practical. The act of writing law changed the social contract. Where rules are written, people learn to negotiate rights, to calculate risk, to plan with expectations that survive administrations. Babylon shows how a city can be both a workshop of science and a laboratory of governance. Those twin threads, how we organize and how we know, are Hammurabi's quiet, persistent legacy. If you leave with one image, let it be complexity. A basalt stele under gallery light, glazed bricks reflecting a procession of priests, star lists traced on clay. Babylon is not a single moral or a single myth. It is a long experiment in urban life, a place where laws were formalized, gardens were imagined, and the skies were measured. Those experiments shaped the world we inherit. If you're curious about a single thread, the code, the gardens, the math, follow it forward. Read the tablets scholars translate, visit the museums, and question the neat stories we inherit. The past is a set of puzzles, some solved and others deliberately left open. Hammurabi's code is one of those puzzles that keeps returning to the basics. Who makes the rules and why?